I want to bring it in so it's angled that way a little bit. And I'm going to have my left knee on the other side of my right foot. So from a side view, that's what that'll look like. Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to shift my weight into this hip. So I'm really going to sit into that side. Notice that I'm exaggerating it, but I'm trying to shift my weight that way, which will then put my weight through this left leg. And I'm even going to, and this is something you can play with, but I even like to lift my back knee off the ground ever so slightly, just to get a little more weight going through this side. And you can gently push your back foot against the wall slightly. Now make sure your pelvis isn't pointed off to the side. Just like in that previous exercise we did, I want you to try and point that laser over to the hip that you're stretching. So what you should see out of all this is you should have kind of a slightly angled in femur. You can play with the amount of hip flexion that you're in. You can sit back into it a little bit more, come forward a little bit more, find where it feels best for you. Back leg against the wall. And then, like I said, take your weight through that leg. You should feel like that back hip is kind of bowing into your glute. So from a side view, same thing here. I'm going to have my back foot against the wall. I'm going to bring my right femur, because I'm stretching my right hip, across midline slightly. And then my right heel will go on the other side of my knee. And I'm going to shift myself towards that hip a little bit. And I'm going to take my weight through that leg. So like I said, sometimes I even like to lift that back knee off the ground ever so slightly, which then forces me to take a little more weight through this leg. And I'm going to gently push my foot into the back wall, which will give you just a little bit of glute on that side. Now here I've got a decent stretch already in the back of my hip, and like I said earlier, you want to think about like your femur bone in that hip almost like poking into the back side of your hip. That's kind of the goal or the sensation you're chasing here. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world because you're stretching deep tissue, but that's the sensation we're looking for. And for some people, just being here might be a big stretch. You can actually increase that if it doesn't feel like a big stretch by coming down onto your elbows. And again, keeping your weight through that right leg, really shifting into that right hip, and you can do your stretch here. So I want you to play around with that. Like I said, you can adjust the angle of hip flexion a little bit as needed as well. And then you're just going to hang out and we're going to stretch. So set yourself up in that position, find your best stretch, and then I'm going to talk you guys through what the PAILs and the rails are going to look like for this exercise while you're in that stretch right now. So let me check our time here to make sure we keep you in that stretch for a little while. So when you're in this position, what your PAILs is going to be when you're in that stretch is you're actually going to think about pressing your leg, pressing your knee, pressing your femur down into the ground. That's your PAILs contraction. In doing so, if you were to push really hard and actually let yourself move, often what would happen is if you imagine that laser coming out of your pelvis, is you'd actually drive yourself up and externally rotate. So you would end up kind of doing that motion, but you're not going to let that happen at all. And it's easier to not let happen because you've got yourself kind of hooked in with that other leg there. So the PAILs, like I said, just pressing that knee down into the ground, letting yourself get heavier on that leg and pressing down. Your rails, of course, will be the opposite. Then you're going to try and pull yourself deeper into that stretch. So you're trying to turn your pelvis to that side a little bit more. You're thinking pull your hip into your hip socket, and that's going to be our rails contraction. Now this is going to feel a little different than when you do, say, your PAILs and rails for internal rotation, where you press into the ground and then you try and lift off and you feel it a little bit more superficially. You're going to feel deeper stuff happening. It's going to be, for a lot of people, a little harder to connect to, but there's a lot of value in it. So I'll come join you in that stretch now. We'll hit our first round of PAILs and rails. If you want to bank a little extra time in that stretch, please hit pause, and you can do so, and then you can resume the video whenever you're ready. Now, whether you're on your elbows or you're up on your hands, you're going to start to think about pushing that knee down into the ground, driving your femur down, but not changing your pelvis or hip position at all. Staying in that stretch just as you are. Give me a 10% effort to start. Work your way up to 20, 40, 60, push through that knee, 80, get heavy through that knee, And your greatest, safest, pain-free effort, and hold. No position change at all. Pelvis stays totally still, but you're pushing through that knee into the ground. Trying to drive that femur through the earth without changing position, maintaining a light pressure through your left foot into the wall. Keep holding here. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now you're going to reverse. You're going to think, pull that hip deeper into the socket. Turn your pelvis towards that side ever so slightly. You're going to feel some deep groin action right up by your pelvis happening. It'll be high in your groin. You're going to maintain that. Keep trying to pull that hip into that socket. You're trying to bow into the back of that hip, and you're holding that for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then slowly relax, slowly let that out.